turn it on and see if it's working, and then I can start breathing again. No, I was talking to myself. Test, test, 1, 2, 3, test, test, 1, 2, 3. Test, test, 1, 2, 3, test, test, 1, 2, 3. Test, test, 1, 2, 3. Oh, good, I can hear it. Well, no, it's okay. Test, test, test. Well, or how loud? Let me see. Test, 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 test. It's pretty loud.
Yeah, that's good.
All right, let's see. It's
How's Rory doing?
It's gonna be tough, but I'll try. As long as they're not top hats, remember.
Where did they practice for that? The civil rights. The guy said he moves around. Yeah, I was just wondering if they had the same plans as they did in
Oh my goodness, what a nice spread.
They always build them too small. We haven't built a school break size yet. They said they're not allowed, so.
let's see. Maybe you will, maybe you won't.
Okay, Ray.
Yeah.
That's only like
Well, I put it in my cream, and I wanted to see if you felt how you felt about it. Sure. Yes.
But they're amazing. I was just having, they're basically the same questions I was.
Yeah, that is a big.
Well, I remember,
Hopefully you do good group of people. It's going to take you one step for the kids.
yeah, I spoke to another synagogue. There, Sheriff, was there. I spent last time, Saturday. Really? Yeah. It was really interesting.
You just go to God, you gotta, they're going to play rate.
Yeah, and you said you think just when you listen to this.
I don't think it was SpongeBob, whatever, yeah, whatever.
Exactly, right. I just want to make sure you're set up with all creature comforts. I'm going to be good. This is great. I want to kind of keep it real enthusiasm for your. which we don't have coffee tables here. All right, so give me a second to think about this. Table. I'm going to put a tablecloth over this and it will look good. Okay, that's a great idea. Just put a little cloth over it and then. And nice. And if it falls, let's see.
It'll get,
This is just going to the stream, and that one just help you
Okay.
file it.
gentlemen, just want you to know we'll be starting in just a few minutes, maybe 5 minutes at the most. And so if you are at a table in the back, you're certainly welcome to stay at the table. But if it was your hope or instinct to move forward, then I'm giving you a 5-minute countdown.
Just flash the lights.
That's right. Let me just put this microphone on a little bit louder. And also, this is on. I think she would do instinctively. All right, I think we should, let's get started. So, here, have a seat here. Great. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you can hear me, and we're going to get started. Welcome, everyone. I think you know me. I am Ari Goldstein, of course, but next to me, more importantly, is our speaker, David Bernstein. And by the way, thank you so much to the Barbara Kesh and Wingrove Adult Education Fund, which was just recently established as a way of just making events and programs like this more accessible for us and more available. And this one is going to be special for sure. I say that because I personally remember meeting and listening to David earlier this year and found myself just affected in terms of just being able to appreciate and experience kind of what's going on around me in a different, maybe more mature, maybe more, let's not say mature, but say more thoughtful way for me. And and from the moment I heard David speak, I wanted to just have you hear him too. And I think his message is really important, and I think that it's helpful, and it enables us all to be able to understand and kind of process what's going on around us in a different way. And so, briefly, I just want to tell you that, well, let's see. So David is a passionate advocate of free expression of ideas and the State of Israel. He's the founder of the Jewish Institute for Liberal Values, now renamed North American Values Institute. And there's a double message there, or double meaning, or a double entendre, because that's Navi, which N-A-V-I spells out Navi, which is a Hebrew word which means prophet. So to some degree, I think that they think that their thoughts are prophetic. He doesn't admit it, but he does. Right? There's a lot here. I'm going to, trust me, his credentials speak for themselves, but I do want you to know that he recently wrote a book. It came out about, I think, 2 years ago, maybe, and it's called Woke Anti-Semitism, How a Progressive Ideology Harms Jews. It's on Amazon, but I think I see a box that has a handful of them there, which if you're interested in it, which something tells me you might be, he'll have some available for you, I suspect, to purchase. Now, the way that we're going to model this conversation, sure, take the front row, but just know that we call on the people in the front row. The way that we're going to model this is more of a conversation, but there'll also be opportunities for you to ask questions at the end, or to be perfectly honest, even in the middle, if it feels like it's an essential point, or if it feels like something is really not kind of adding up and you need some help, you're welcome to kind of pause this in the middle, and we'll do the best that we can to get to your questions. You should know that we are streaming this, so it is going, so don't say anything embarrassing. Don't embarrass me, at least. You can embarrass yourselves all you want to. So what we're going to do is we're going to do this in the form of a conversation and to help kind of better understand David and his ideas. And so why don't we start with just your organization, the Jewish Institute for Liberal Values, or NAVI now, North American Veterans. So tell us a little bit about how that came to be and what it is that you do there.
Sure. Well, thank you for having me. It's wonderful to meet you all. It's quite a spread you all have here. I was just at a synagogue in Philadelphia last week, and I was telling the rabbi, we got to lunch, and I was hungry. It was, and there was, one quiche and salad. And by the time I got there, there was no salad left, and there was a piece of quiche about that big. So see all the whitefish and everything. It's wonderful. You guys have it made here. You just don't know it.
We had filet mignon for the last person who spoke whitefish.
I might even take the whitefish, to be honest with you. Really nice to be here. So I'm a lifer in the Jewish world. I've been in the Jewish advocacy world my entire career. I spent 13 years at the American Jewish Committee. I was past CEO of the Jewish Council for Public Affairs, which is an umbrella of all the Jewish community relations councils around the United States. In the last several years, though, I started to see an ideology that was catching on everywhere in society, but also in the Jewish community. This ideology divided people into oppressed and oppressors. And it portrayed itself as the next iteration of the civil rights movement, but I didn't see it that way. I saw it as a movement that shut down other voices, that pretended to define the world for everybody else and told everybody else what they had to think. And also, in defining everybody in this oppressor term, put Jews often in the oppressor box. And I thought this is very dangerous, and yet I was watching people around me, including in my own organization, buy into it hook, line, and sinker. And so I left in the winter of 2021. A few months later, I launched the Jewish Institute for Liberal Values with the letter that I wrote with Rabbi David Wolpe, Yossi Klein-Halevi, you might know him,
Sure.
Barry Weiss, Brett Stevens, some very prominent voices. And we circulated around the Jewish community and obtained signatures warning people of this ideology and its implications for the Jewish community. And that was the founding of the Jewish Institute for Liberal Values. JILV was meant to try to help the Jewish community connect the dots between a radical ideology on the left and the rise of anti-Semitism. Now, this was a couple years before October 7th, and obviously after October 7th, a lot changed. And we'll talk about how it changed and what its implications are for the Jewish community. But suffice it to say that after October 7th, we felt we needed to do something a little differently. The Jewish community started to understand this idea of connecting the dots between radical leftist ideology and anti-Semitism. I started to hear more and more prominent Jews use the term oppressed-oppressor binary in how they talked about what was going on around them and how that was problematic for the Jewish community. And yet at the same time, I was noticing that most Jewish organizations were not really pivoting in any substantive way. They weren't doing anything different as a result of this recognition. And so we started to ask ourselves, well, what's the most important work we could be doing in this environment? And we noticed that this ideology was really infecting K through 12 schools. And I'll talk more about that, but all of a sudden, we started to see really radicalized teachers, particularly after October 7th, but we saw it in California, especially before October 7th. It was in the form of a curriculum called ethnic studies that you may have heard of. Ethnic studies was not about the study of ethnicities. It was really about the study of oppression and how the West was oppressing everyone else in the world and how the United States was a settler colonial state, just like Israel is a settler colonial state. And people didn't see this coming, and we said, this is going to spread. So we decided just about 6 months ago, we were going to go full-time on this K through 12 education front. And we were going to rename ourselves something that didn't necessarily raise the word liberal, which we'll talk about, or necessarily Jewish, because we see ourselves working with other ethnic communities that have a like-minded perspective on this and trying to push back against this radical left-wing ideology.
So when you talk about liberal, what does that mean to you?
Yeah, I know. Liberal is a loaded word, and it means different things to different people. The classical liberal, or liberalism as an ideology, means the free expression of ideas, equality under the law, free inquiry and free thought, the rule of law, usually free market economy. So it conjures up a certain system of governance that really our country, our democratic republic, is built upon. Now, unfortunately, the word liberal has been used to describe a single political perspective. And so people in this country in particular associate it with being left-wing or progressive. So we were trying to reclaim the idea of liberalism in its purest form when we named the organization as a counter to the leftist ideology that had taken over some of our own ideological camp. And we thought that reclaiming that was a good idea in the title. Unfortunately, though, a lot of people take one look at the word liberal and they run the other way. And some of those people might have funds that they would like to give to my organization if they knew a little bit more about it. So we thought that we needed to rename. It took us a little while to come up with something, and we settled on NAVI, North American Values Institute.
So I mean, I so desperately just want to kind of get straight into it. So, your book, Woke Anti-Semitism. Can we go into that conversation a little bit? So tell us a little bit about like how you see woke and how you see then woke anti-Semitism. Because as I understand, I mean, of course, I've had somewhat of a renaissance of thought about this, but the concept of woke, it seems like just a purely good idea of caring about other people and caring about what's going on with other people and their needs and what their experience is, and not just being so focused on yourself. Like, how do you see the word woke and what it means?
Sure. So woke originally was a term used in the black community to say, be alert to the threats against you. If you're driving somewhere, be woke. In other words, be aware that you could be targeted by somebody. This goes back a long time ago, and there was a song called I think it's called "Be Woke" by Leadbelly, I think it was. So it's been around a long time. The word started to morph into something else maybe 15 years ago, often associated with the Black Lives Matter movement. And the idea was that you were going to be woke to the systems of oppression that exist in our society. In other words, you were not going to be blind to them. You were going to understand how this sort of silent oppressor was keeping you down and people like you down. I first came across the word in 2016. Maybe I had heard it before, but I remember the first time I heard people use it. We were invited, I was the head of another organization, we were invited to have a meeting with the Black Lives Matter movement. It was in New York. And people were using the word woke to sort of describe the systematic oppression in this country and what they would call the white supremacy that existed everywhere in our society. And I thought, okay, so that's how they're using the term. And later on, people like me who were critiquing that ideology, and maybe I'll give it a definition if you don't mind, who were critiquing that ideology started to say, we said, okay, that's what people are calling it, we'll call it woke. Since that time, people have gone after those of us who have called it woke and say, you're appropriating a term used by the black community, don't say that. And, my book is named after it. I don't really care as long as we have some term that people are okay using. For a long time, any term you would come up with, either no one understood or they would condemn. So I don't care that much about terminology. I had a lady last week who was in the audience, and she was just incensed that I used the word. And I thought, okay, well, we got to get beyond words. Let's call it banana if you need a term. We'll refer to this ideology as banana if we have to. So what is woke? What do I mean by woke? And I realize other people, by the way, when they use the term, they may use it in a very mischievous way, in a way that I think is not helpful. But what I mean by woke is that it's two fundamental tenets. Number one, that prejudice and racism and bigotry are not just a matter of personal opinion, but they're embedded, they're ingrained in the very structures and fabric of our society. That's one. Number two, that only people with the lived experience of oppression, in other words, only the oppressed, are qualified and have the insight to define that oppression for the rest of society. So if you're black, you get to define racism. If you're gay, you get to define homophobia. If you're Jewish, you get to define anti-Semitism. Well, maybe not so much. But that's the logic of wokeness, of this critical social justice ideology. Now, what that does is if you're representative, supposedly, of a minority community, as if any one of us can represent any group, you get to tell everybody else who's not part of that minority group what you must think about racism and oppression. And you can impose that upon the discourse in society. So that becomes the source of cancel culture. How dare you say that? That is not in line with the way that we should be thinking about these issues, because we've learned that from others who have experienced oppression. Now, I want to put a qualifier in, and that is that both of these tenets that I just spoke of can be true, but they're not always true. In other words, it can be true that there's systemic oppression. Jim Crow America was a systemically racist place. You could argue that, I would argue that there's pockets of white supremacy and systemic racism in America today. But it's not always true. And there are other ways of looking at problems and disparities between people than just imposing this single explanation of the world. It's all white supremacy that's doing this. Also, the idea that people who have experienced oppression have something to say about it, I think, it's a worthy thought, right? I mean, I grew up in Columbus, Ohio in the 1970s and 1980s. There was a lot of anti-Semitism where I was. There were people who threw coins at my feet and drew swastikas in my book. And I'd like to think that somebody who did not grow up with that might want to hear what I have to say about anti-Semitism. I have unique experience. I have lived experience. But I don't get to define it for the rest of society. I might be wrong. Rabbi's experience with anti-Semitism may be very different than mine, and he's Jewish too.
That's right.
And it also might be the case that there are other data points besides my own lived experience. So when I read a survey from Pew a while ago that Americans admire Jews more than any other religious experience, I have to take that into account too, even if it doesn't comport with my lived experience. So I think there's a nuanced way to talk about these things, but it is not the idea that something that is sometimes true must always be true. And an ideology is a sometimes that pretends to be an always. And I think that's where we've gotten off track.
And what you're saying is, and that's, at least in terms of woke, that is kind of how it's kind of taken on a life of its own, because we are, because everyone gets to define it, and we are forced, or in any case, we're forced to accept all definitions and make it into one enormous thing, because we're uncomfortable even denying or questioning someone's experience of woke in the first place.
Absolutely. There's a video, you can watch it on YouTube, of a University of Minnesota medical school graduation. And you have these recent grads from medical school. And the dean gets up there and he says, we're going to read a statement together. Everybody's going to read out loud. And it started out with a land acknowledgement. I'm sure you've heard of land acknowledgements by now. The idea that we are on land that was once populated by whatever tribe and so forth. Starts out that way, and even that is, to me, highly problematic. Like, maybe I think maybe that's not my belief, or maybe one of those tribes conquered another tribe, along the way. Why are we just calling it their land.
And acknowledging it, but
And
not doing
acknow-
anything about it.
Exactly. Or if you're really serious, maybe you should just leave, right? Like Ben and Jerry said, well, maybe you should give all your Ben and Jerry's to the whatever tribe. But then they went into this reading about how medicine was a systemically racist field. And everybody's reading this. And I was looking around in the YouTube video, and I was watching some of the students sort of roll their eyes, and some of the people roll their eyes. But yet they still read it because that was what they were called on to do.
Right.
And I think that's very problematic, and it created a lot of resentment in society. If you're, by the way, a poor white person in West Virginia, or let's say I'm from Ohio, so like Steubenville, Ohio, former manufacturing town, there's a huge opioid endemic, and you're being told by a bunch of elites that you are privileged because of your whiteness, you're not going to be happy about that. And that spreads, and that causes a tremendous resentment. And it even creates a backlash. Imagine that, a backlash that might even be as dangerous as that which it was lashing out against. So we have to be very careful with this, and I think we're living in a backlash now in many ways.
Can we, so let's now take it more specifically to the woke anti-Semitism. So how is it that concept then becomes anti-Semitic?
Yeah. So the idea of this oppressor binary is not, in my view, in and of itself anti-Semitic. It's simplistic. It can be wrong, but it's not in and of itself anti-Semitic. The problem is that it tends to view any group that is on average successful as being part and complicit in white supremacy. Okay? If you're viewed like Asian Americans, like Jews, like Indian Americans, by the way, Nigerian Americans, as a successful community, it must be that you took advantage of white supremacy to get where you are. And that dynamic then fuels anti-Semitism. And I don't think many of us before October 7th, we saw it, I wrote a book about it, understood that was spreading and that people were buying into it, particularly young people, but also, it was entering the bloodstream of many institutions, and that it did one of two things. Either it fueled anti-Semitism among people who were sort of inclined to be anti-Semitic, or it silenced people who might have otherwise stood up for us against those anti-Semitic trends because they didn't want to be on the wrong side of that binary equation. And that's why so many people were shell-shocked. They just didn't understand that it had been building up. Look, and so what happens is you start to hear terms like Jewish privilege all of a sudden, which sounds a lot like Jewish power and Jewish control. So it's piggybacking on anti-Semitic tropes that have already been part of our societal bloodstream. And we've seen that in spades. It was happening before, if we had paid attention to it, before October 7th, if we had paid attention to it. So that to me is fundamentally what I mean by it. You see it and I think you're going to ask me a question about this, or we talked about it, at least intersectionality, this concept of intersectionality. Intersectionality is another expression of this oppressor binary. What it originally meant, and sometimes as I said, some terms have some usefulness that then goes way off course. It originally was coined by a woman named Kimberly Crenshaw, who was trying to describe something that she was seeing. She thought that if you were part of two victim groups, and this is in the 1980s, like being black and a woman, you faced a kind of double jeopardy in a way that was more than being either black or a woman. And she was describing that concept, and then others took over the concept, and what they meant by intersectionality was they were connecting causes. So if you were part of the Black Lives Matter cause, then you were supported by the rape violence cause, or the people against rape violence, and the environmental cause. You were all going to connect against the oppressors of the world. And my first day of the job in January I think 4th, 2016, at the Jewish Council for Public Affairs, I wrote an article called The Anti-Semitic Trend You've Never Heard Of, and it was about intersectionality. And it caused a firestorm. This is my first day on the job.
Started with a bang.
It started with a bang. There were 9 op-eds written in response to it. And I was pointing this problem out, and people said, no, intersectionality is a completely legitimate concept. And how dare you challenge it? That was even more. How dare you, a white Jewish guy, my mom's from Baghdad, Iraq, by the way, but I guess I'm a white Jewish guy. How dare you challenge this concept? You have no standing to challenge this concept. What I mean by wokeness,
Yeah,
right?
it's the same as before, right?
Yes. So what that was doing, and we saw it happening, people were connecting the dots. They were connecting the dots between the Black Lives Matter movement and the Palestinian Solidarity movement. And so you started to see anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism and anti-Israelism spread through this newfound solidarity that was expressed through intersectionality.
And is that to some degree? I've heard this expression, the Red-Green Alliance, which I think is the alliance that which is maybe a very ultra-radical liberal and the Palestinian movement. Is that the same concept that you're talking about?
It's the same concept, but it's a very particular expression of that concept. If you go back even 20-some years ago, they started to call this the Red-Green Alliance in Europe, that they were seeing radical progressive groups join with radical Islamist groups in Europe, groups that were associated with the Muslim Brotherhood, and seeing themselves as part of one movement. That was not such a popular idea in the U.S. before sort of this intersectional ideology took hold. It existed. You would see the Council of American Islamic Relations try to build ties with some leftist groups, but it never became anything close to what we saw, let's say, in the encampments last year on college campuses. We really saw it take off after October 7th in ways that we couldn't imagine before.
Right.
And so we knew about it. In fact, we sponsored a paper on the Red-Green Alliance written by an Israeli think tank called the Ariud Institute well before October 7th, saying this is catching on now. Again, but after October 7th, you really saw that movement take shape. So a lot of the people who were driving the radicalism on campus weren't students, and if they were students, they were probably more radical Muslim students who were studying in the United States. They were leading these movements in many cases. So that's what we mean by the Red-Green Alliance. Now, you'd say, well, how can a progressive group that is supposedly for, LGBTQ rights and the like join forces with a radical Muslim group? In their view, the colonized group, as they see it, is always the oppressed and can be excused for its excesses and so forth. That the first thing you must do is decolonize them. And then you can worry about whether or not they have the right views on environment or gay rights or the like.
I mean, of course, right, but that's the language of decolonize is from their perspective. I mean, there's no, it reminds me, what you're talking about reminds me of some of you were here 20 years ago, not many. Some of you were here 20 years ago, and Charles Krauthammer spoke at the synagogue. Really, it was a fascinating conversation and he spoke about how the honeymoon period
Yes.
of anti-Semitism was now over. In other words, that the post-Holocaust, and Jews were off limits for anyone to criticize. And this was back in 2004 or 5 that he said it. He said it was over.
Yeah,
and
it was.
And it's kind of, we've been watching that kind of, talk about it, Navi, a prophet, kind of, we've seen that tremendously in the last 20 years since he spoke.
Yeah, the term decolonize, I think I want to pause here for 1 second. It's, when you hear run the other way, okay, run the other way. If your kids or grandkids are learning through a decolonization lens, nothing as good is going to happen from that. I promise you. They may not mention Jews or Israel, but I promise you it's on the tip of their tongues. And what does that mean? We think of decolonize as the UK or France should leave its former colonies. Fine. That's not what they are talking about. When they talk about decolonization, they mean that we have to rid the Western canon and Western influence and Western imperialism in this large ideological way that they're talking about it from all of our collective works, from the way that we learn, from the way that we teach. Now, you can go to a teacher's college in any university practically in the country, and there will be not one course, but multiple courses on decolonizing the curriculum or decolonizing the syllabus. I have this experiment. There's a video I show of a young woman. She's a social work student, a master's student at Columbia University, and she's wearing her keffiyeh and the like. And there was, early on in the whole spring of last year movement, they were doing sit-ins in the social work building at Columbia. And the social work school eventually kicked them out. And there was this interview with this young woman, and she said, well, they're telling us that we have to decolonize social work. So how come we can't decolonize Palestine? And aren't they just hypocrites? In some ways, she had a point, by the way. And so I share this video to Jewish audiences, and I said, okay, what strikes you about that video? And immediately they said, well, she wants to destroy Israel. I said, you're missing the point. You missed the whole thing about decolonizing social work. Decolonizing social work means that we are no longer going to meet our clients where they are, but we are going to tell them that they are victims of the system and that they should learn to see that to resist systems of oppression, and if they can resist systems of oppression, they will be able to make themselves whole. That is what she is learning at Columbia in social work school. Don't you think that that's going to impact the way that she sees Jews in Israel as well? In other words, if you're not seeing, I like to say beneath the waterline, imagine that iceberg metaphor, right? And then there's the ocean, which is the waterline. And above the waterline is the anti-Semitism and anti-Israelism that we all recognize. Beneath the waterline is this radical ideology which has been percolating and creating the iceberg above the waterline. And we are not keyed into it. So if you don't understand decolonizing social work, you don't understand anti-Semitism. And I think that's why we've got to be alert to it. We have somebody doing research on this right now, and I asked her, let's look at 50 universities and teachers' colleges and find out what you can find about decolonizing the curriculum. She says, I'm finding it everywhere. Everywhere. Some schools, it's the entire lens through which they're teaching young teachers. So should we be surprised that we're seeing what we're seeing in K through 12 education? When young teachers are being schooled in this, that's our problem. It goes much deeper than the anti-Semitism itself.
It's concerning. How would, look, you just quickly quipped about how, your father is from Iraq.
My mother.
Mother, excuse me. So, and we know that Jews come in all shapes and colors and sizes. How is it that in terms of the marginalized community, why is it that, and that's talk about, or like the opposite of intersectionality, when you have a person who is claimed to be an oppressor and yet has the physical features of being an oppressed. How does that spin in the, to the people who accuse us of being an oppressor?
Yeah, so there's concepts within this sort of social justice matrix that I'm talking about, this radical social justice matrix of like white adjacency or brown complicity. These are a way of saying that there are groups that the white supremacists have empowered to help do their bidding. So Jews and Asian Americans can be called white supremacy. When you have a Latino who joins forces with, in their view, more conservative voices, they're engaged in brown complicity. So there's ways that they have of looking at this that most of us might say that sound ridiculous, right, but actually have purchased within this discourse. And they'll say, of course there are groups. White supremacy knows how to stay in power. And it uses other ethnic communities to basically hold down black and brown people. It enlists them in the white supremacist enterprise.
So you've kind of touched upon this a little bit, but I thought we'd maybe jump into it a little bit more straightforward. How is this kind of translated into what's going on in Israel, or maybe post-October 7th, or pre-October 7th also, but especially now post-October 7th? How is it playing itself out?
So I want to talk about it in terms of the Jewish community and then the general public. So obviously for many Jews, October 7th was a huge wake-up call. I'll give you one story. I went to speak at the American Jewish Committee in Miami. Now, I had hired, when I worked at the American Jewish Committee, the director there, he's a longtime friend of mine. I can tell he was nervous about having me speak. And he said, look, David, there are some people who might not react very well to your message. And he was pointing to a high-powered woman attorney who was a senior partner at a law firm who was going to be there, very progressive, very active in Democratic Party politics and the like, and she might react poorly. No worries, I'll behave. So I go and I give my spiel, and then we start going around the table. And every single person agreed with me around that table. And then we get to this woman that he was most concerned about, and you could feel that everybody was holding their breath in the room. And she said, I don't know who I am anymore. Many of the friends that I have been working and laboring with in progressive politics are denying that women were raped on October 7th. She was in a state of shock, and she couldn't even imagine where she stood in American society anymore. I think that's where a lot of American Jews were out the fact. I got invited to speak at a Reform synagogue in my area. I won't tell you which one.
What did they serve?
What did they serve? It was a Friday night. It was a Friday night Kiddush, and it was mostly like just the desserts. When I go to an Orthodox synagogue, by the way, to speak, I always talk about the chillin'. How good was the chillin'? The rabbi, the number two rabbi, it turns out that the senior rabbi is the one who invited me, and the number two rabbi was not thrilled that I was coming. And she called me a few days to, prepare for everything and said, by the way, I want to let you know that I was opposed for you coming to the synagogue and spoke. But then October 7th happened. I was invited before October 7th. And I started thinking, and then I read your book, and I'm so happy you're coming. So that's been my experience, writ large. And I think that's where the Jewish community is, not understanding where it fits into American society, and I think we're in a state still, things are settling some, but I think it's still profoundly confusing for many American Jews. We saw the center left as a safe harbor against what we thought was the true threat of anti-Semitism and extremism on the right. We used to say, by the way, even before October 7th, when I was asked, what do I think is worse, anti-Semitism on the left or the right? I would say anti-Semitism on the right is like a hurricane. It comes in and it's violent, it's loud, it's brazen. It doesn't speak in uncertain terms. Anti-Semitism on the left is like climate change. It's slow moving, it's corrosive, or someone said maybe it's anti-Semitism on the right is like a heart attack, and anti-Semitism on the left is like a cancer. Pick whatever metaphor you want. What happened after October 7th is that anti-Semitism on the left is like a tsunami. And and we can no longer pretend that our biggest threat is from the right anymore. I'm not saying it isn't. I'm just saying you have to take it seriously. That we face threats from either side of the political spectrum. And we may not have a safe harbor. All right, that's the Jews. Look, I think our society has pushed back against this ideology. Someone said we're past peak woke in society. I think that's true. But I think what's happening, though, at that very same time, is that the institutions that had bought into this the most are doubling down on it now. So K through 12 education is trying as hard as it can to get as much of this radicalism as it possibly can. Because it's worried that the clock is ticking, and if they don't institutionalize it now, they may never be able to get it in. Let me give you an example of that. I live in Montgomery County, Maryland. I'm sure all of you have been there because we're not that far. Montgomery County, Maryland public schools, it's one big school system, right? There's 100,000 Jews plus who live in Montgomery County. That means a significant percentage, probably 10% or more of the population in schools is Jewish. They are teaching something to their kids called white supremacy culture framework. Now, what is white supremacy culture? It holds that norms like being on time to work or school, being a perfectionist, or being objective are white supremacy values. Now, that sounds as absurd as it is, but it is being taught as official doctrine of the Montgomery County public school system. The national education system, the country's largest teachers union, is actively promoting white supremacy culture. That is still happening. So even as we're seeing society saying, look, we don't want this radical oppressor thing, and we're seeing pushback in some institutions, even in the Jewish world, there are places that this ideology dominates where it's just getting worse.
And,
David, my
sure.
To the right.
Yeah, you, go ahead, yeah.
teacher's trade union, she's a Jewish woman. Can you talk about it?
You mean the head of the American Teachers, American Teacher Federation? There's two large teachers unions. One is the NEA, and the other is the American Federation, AFT, American Federation of Teachers. The head of that union is a Jewish woman, a gay Jewish woman who's married to a rabbi. She is definitely ideologically left. She's also considers herself a progressive Zionist. So this can get very complicated for the Jewish community. So on the one hand, she's promoting this radical DEI ideology in the teachers union and outside the teachers union. On the other hand, every time there's an anti-Israel, anti-Zionist resolution that comes before their body, she behind the scenes nixes it. So
She's responsible for it in some measure, and Nixon.
and it nixes it on the other end. That's what's happening.
It's a,
Can I ask?
sure, you know what? Let's do it. Let's do it. Let's.
Yeah, I'm so open-minded to listen to you today. And I have to tell you, I'm a journalist. I worked for NBC News for a lot of years. And so I really came in here to hear you. And I think, and I'm not taking a Democratic or Republican side to this. But what I wonder, is, do you take any responsibility for promulgating this idea that American Jews have supported Trump, and here we are with DEI being dismantled, and you talk about the Department of Education, which he's going to do away with. And so is the extremism of what's happening right now as important for Jews who, whether you're a Zionist or not, believe that this country is what this country is founded on, which I don't have to explain
Yeah,
anymore.
thank you.
I'm just going to PS that, if that's okay. So, I'm fiercely Jewish. I'm the daughter of a Holocaust survivor. I love Israel. I love Israel. And I talked to a cousin before I came here who I love, Michael Steinberg. So, and he said to me, I told him I was coming here, and he said, well, you know, I voted for Trump. And I said, I know you did. And he said, you know, Trump is better for Israel. I know he's a disgrace. I know he's anti-woman, anti-woke. And talk about oppression. Like if woke is about anti-oppression, and I'm a journalism professor, and our education department is being dissolved. So quick question to follow up on journalist Mary, because I'm a journalist too, is how do you feel when someone tells you, wow, your subhead is the progressive movement is fanning anti-Semitism, but how about a progressive movement that loves Israel, but is really horrified by the other anti-woke things that are happening in this country? Thank you.
Yeah, it's a complicated question, so I'm going to do my best. Okay. First of all, I should have said this in the beginning. I'm basically a center-left guy. I support immigrant rights and a generous immigration policy. I support, I'm I'm pro-choice. I'm against mass incarceration. There's a lot of policies. When I do those tests online, I line up pretty much with the Democratic Party. Yet I clearly have some problems with the direction it's gone. And again, that doesn't mean that I don't want to say Trump or not. I just because we'll get off track there. What I want to say is that I think, by the way, that these ideological trends are not helping Democrats get elected. And if you look at what happened at the DNC after the election, when it was clear that these cultural issues did not serve the Democratic Party well, and if you're not seeing that, I'm sorry, I think you're not diagnosing the situation correctly. But when you watched how that conversation took place at the DNC and when they elected a new chair and vice chair of the DNC, you see that the Democratic Party is sort of stuck in this, and I think it's making them unelectable. So if you ask me, honestly, I believe that I'm doing, and people like me who come from sort of the center left and want to see the Democratic Party thrive, we're doing it a favor. Because ultimately, you better find a way to talk about these issues in a different way than we are now. And if you continue to talk about them in these ways, you will alienate everybody. And you will be part of a permanent minority. And that does not serve our country well. We need 2 healthy parties. Maybe we have 0 now. But we need 2 healthy parties in this country, and you're not doing, the Democratic Party has made itself unelectable. After the Virginia elections a couple years ago, when it was clear that Governor Glenn Youngkin defeated Terry McAuliffe on the critical race theory debate, it was an opportunity at that time for the Democratic Party to say, wait a second, maybe we shouldn't allow these radical trends to take place in K-12 education. Maybe we should call out critical race theory and have what they called in the Clinton administration a Sister Souljah moment. But instead, they doubled down on it. And James Carville, who helped get Clinton elected, said at the time, it's time for the Democratic Party to go through woke detox. But they didn't. And there are others now saying it. If you listen to Rahm Emanuel, who's also a Clinton and Obama guy, by the way, and was the former ambassador to Japan, he's saying the same thing. So there are wings of the Democratic Party who are horrified at the direction it's going and think it's a problem. Now, you mentioned DEI, and I want to get to DEI. What is DEI? That's the first question I had. What is DEI? A lot of people, when they think of DEI, they think, okay, we're going to help make our institutions more diverse and inclusive. By the way, I'm all for that, okay? The problem is that's not what DEI does. Yes, there are forms of DEI that I can live with. I was talking to this chair of one of the largest law firms in the United States, and I was telling him I'm very worried that this is before Trump came in. Very worried about radical coercive DEI programs. And he in his own firm, what does he do in the name of DEI? They simply make sure that black associates have mentors within their ranks. And for him, that's what DEI was. That is not what DEI is in college campuses. That's not what it is in K through 12. That's not what it is in a lot of nonprofits, by the way, either. In many of these places, it's separating kids into affinity groups and telling them that they have to either take responsibility for their complicity in whiteness or tell them that they have to join solidarity with other similarly situated groups against the white oppressors. It's the white supremacy culture framework that I just started talking about. That is being sold under the banner DEI. So do I think that needs to be, out of our body politic? Yeah, I do. And I think as long as it's there, it's going to be a problem for the Democratic Party. By the way, there are a lot of progressives who are not upset about Trump banning DEI because for them, this just gets in the way of progressive causes. Ryan Grimm, by the way, who's somebody I do not like on Israel at all, has written, and he's written extensively about how DEI has corrupted progressive advocacy work because it gets them off of trying to change the society at large. They turn inward, they make everybody take responsibility for the impression, and they get nothing done. So I think that these trends, and particularly DEI, are probably the worst thing that ever happened to Democratic politics. Now the Department of Education. Look, first of all, President Trump probably cannot unilaterally ban the Department of Education. It was created by a vote of Congress, so he would need a congressional vote to do that. In other words, this is not going to be a unilateral move, and unless he